Hello out there, this is Cammie White, and you're listening to Rushdown Radio.
Hey, it's me, Anthony. And in preparation for this review, I decided that I was going to kind of revisit the trailers that were put out for this game. It's something I typically do, just so, I'm not really sure why. I just want to compare the marketing to what we got. And what I found in this particular game was pretty interesting. But before we get into all of that, I want to talk about the rest of the game proper. So let's talk about Dolmen. Dolmen, in its simplest terms, is a sci-fi horror action game where you are a nameless space explorer out to explore Revion Prime, as well as extract materials called Dolmen for resources and materials and weaponry that you'll be using throughout the game. While there, you'll uncover a bunch of weird creatures that have seemingly just appeared out of nowhere. You'll learn about the origins of the planet Revion Prime, where the Dolmen came from, what they're for, and all this other crazy, wacky lore stuff that is, I'm not gonna say the most riveting, but I've read worse stories. And I do mean read, because a lot of the lore here is told in random books, some interactive text screens, and so on. You get a few cutscenes here and there, mostly before a boss battle, or maybe before some major event that just kind of happens, but for the most part, you will get the bulk of this story just reading through text boxes, which is fine, but I would have liked to have seen a few more cutscenes to kind of, tell the story a little better, especially given that the story that you do read is only just okay. But for the most part, it's serviceable. It at least gives you a good backdrop to tell you why you're doing what you're doing, which for a game like this is all it's really supposed to do. Now, with that out the way, let's talk about the gameplay. There's no other way to say this, it's a Souls-like game. It's got the dodge rolls, it's got the big clunky combat, it's got the infuriating camera. Well, I shouldn't say that because I feel like this camera is probably even more infuriating than most other Souls-like games. Mostly because a lot of action can be found in small rooms and corridors. In big open spaces, this isn't that bad, but when you're stuck in a corner and you're trying to fend off against enemies, that camera is probably your greatest enemy. And it's not very fun to have to contend with the camera and these, honestly, relentless enemies. Or at least they feel relentless given the kind of firepower that you have with you. Despite all the cool weapons and different play styles that you have available to you, and I must say that some of these weapons do look kind of cool, the problem I have is that they don't have satisfying impact. In a lot of other games, you can see characters just wailing on these enemies and the enemy is reeling back. You can kind of feel how chunky those hits are. Or if you're shooting something, you can just kind of tell by some kind of sound design that those blasts are hitting you or something like that. Here, you're just kind of going pew pew pew, and the enemy is just kind of like, oh, that hurts a little bit. Ouch, that kind of sucks. And they just keep coming towards you. Like, yeah, alright, I'll just wait this out. That's cool. And perhaps it's because I kind of have an expectation of Souls-likes, but one thing that has to be in a Souls-like is that the game is difficult. Now, difficulty is subjective because both Michael and myself have played this game, and while he had a hard time, I didn't really have that difficult of a time with it. And part of that is because the AI is kind of dumb. There's times where you can just kind of stand back and just shoot at it, and it just looks at you like, hey, don't do that. And very rarely will they just up and approach you after maybe a few shots. By the time their health is like halfway, they just kind of, oh wait, I'm supposed to be attacking you and being an obstacle. But by then it's too late. Because of the lack of impact I previously mentioned, combat itself just kind of feels flat. I was playing a mostly melee-based character, and it never really felt satisfying to just slash through enemies as quickly as I was with my kind of cool laser claws. We'll get to visuals and such in a moment, but it didn't feel as powerful as I think they intended it to feel. Despite my wild slashes through these enemies and all the blood just kind of splurting out, it never really felt satisfying. I kind of just wanted these things out of my way so I can go to the next big enemy where things don't get much better, but they do get more interesting. And maybe that was because I was just kind of waiting for the big challenge to kick in. Maybe that's something that is more subjective than I realized, but that's just kind of what I played. Boss fights really are the highlight. Despite the fact that combat doesn't feel as great as it should, boss fights at least give you the challenge that you're supposed to have in the Souls-like. For the most part. Sometimes you really can just figure them out in maybe a death or two, and then you just kind of wait them out and kill them. But sometimes they're a little challenging. Sometimes they hit back. You know, sometimes they're challenging and kind of fun. Honestly, the biggest challenge in this game is off-screen enemies. Because the sound design is so scattered and not as good, an enemy that is 10 feet away will sound the exact same as an enemy that is around the corner. You'll hear their same noises and everything. And so it doesn't really do well for you to be prepared for maybe a surprise attack, despite the fact that you can hear this loud, like, groaning noise or maybe a skittering noise, and you don't know if it's far away from you or if it's close or anything like that. In some places they tried to add an echo to give it the idea that it's far away, but it never really helps. So oftentimes you're just feeling kind of ambushed by an enemy that you thought you heard, but you couldn't tell where it was because it sounded the same as maybe something you couldn't see because of distance. Aside from combat, there's also crafting and upgrading, which also shines a light on the big problem I had, which was the UI. If the UI didn't kind of just stick in some places and didn't move the way I liked, it just didn't look good. There's times I couldn't tell where my reticle was because it's a bright yellow that suddenly turns a bright green, but it isn't so distinct that you can tell unless you're squinting your eyes really hard. And so oftentimes I'm not sure what I'm even looking at, and the UI is just, it's kind of clunky. It's not my favorite. All of that said, let's get into my biggest problems with this game. Well, biggest problem. Earlier I said that before I decided to record this, I looked at the trailers again, and I noticed that the footage that you see is the PlayStation 5 version. So it's running at 60 frames mostly. It kind of looks not that budget. It doesn't look like amazing 4K or anything like that, but it looks competent. And I didn't see any footage of the PS4 version, and I think I know why that is. It's because the PS4 version just doesn't work. That's why I initially tried to review this. However, there were so many problems with it that I couldn't even get past the first 30 minutes of playing this game. First of all, it was ugly. It was just, ugh. It's not the prettiest looking game to begin with, but on the PS4, and mind you, I have the base PS4, I don't have the PS4 Pro, but it just looked atrocious, and it ran just as bad. It didn't look like it was running even at a smooth 30 frames per second. However, I threw in the towel because this game likes to freeze, and in the moment of that freeze, I just died. It froze for 2 seconds, I was able to move again, and then boom, I'm dead. It was too much, and I almost didn't review the game. Thankfully, Michael had the PS5 and I was able to play it through that. Otherwise, I wouldn't have played this game. So, if for some reason you like what you see and you think what you've heard here is just kind of like and you want to try it for yourself, please do not get the PS4 version. or at least don't get it on PS4. I'm not sure if there's a dedicated PS5 version, but whatever you do, just don't play it on the base PS4. If it works better on PS4 Pro, more power to it. But my experience was it just doesn't work on PS4. Get it on PS5 if you have it available to you. That said, I already said that I don't think visually it's that stunning. It's definitely not the worst looking game. It's an alright game. It very clearly tries to take inspiration from games such as Dead Space, from the enemies, like the little spider creatures that, you know, kind of look Dead Spacey. I'm not really sure how to elaborate more on that, as well as how your character initially looks, kind of reminds you of Isaac. And I mean, it's not bad. It doesn't look like a one-to-one ripoff. It does look like it took some inspiration though to make it look horror-y, which whether or not you think this is scary is up to you. The music, it just kind of sounds like the typical fare of, I'm going to be quiet for now, but when things get really ramping up, I'm going to play random orchestral song here that's not that I couldn't tell you any musical track that came from this game. It's fine, but it's not memorable. You really won't take any musical tracks away from it, and it really only sounds good in the context of the game. Now, with all that said, I didn't exactly hate my time with Dolmen. I don't think it's a particularly spectacular game by any means, but I do think the foundation of something really good is here. I think that the designs that they have in the game are pretty great. I think that the combat, if it had some more impact, would be pretty cool too, because I mean, some of these sci-fi weapons, I mean, they look kind of cool. If they kind of polished up the graphics more, then I think that there is just some rough edges on this game that if they had smoothed out, it would have made for a pretty decent Souls-like experience in space. I'm only really disappointed about how terrible the PS4 version was. Again, I have the base PS4, so if you have a PS4 Pro and you kind of want to risk it, I don't suggest it, but that is up to you. I just think that this game is showing that the generational gap is widening, and developers aren't really focused too much on the PS4 these days, which is just the natural progression of things, really. That said, I think this game is probably best if you buy it on sale. I don't think that this is an at-release game. If I had to give it a letter grade, I would give it a C+. And I would say if you find this game for perhaps $20 or $15, then sure, give it a shot. Other than that, that's my take on Dolmen. If you have any questions, just plop them in the comments. If you want to discuss whether or not you thought this was great, that's fine. As a fellow masochist that plays Souls-like games, I do like discussing Souls-like games with people. So if you want to talk about this game, feel free to leave a comment and let's talk about it. And with that, if you want to check out any more of our stuff, check out rushdownradio.net. Check us out on your preferred streaming platforms and YouTube, and we'll see you guys later.